going to tell you about the very interesting ways honeybees live. Honeybees are like the ants, social insects. That means one honeybee cannot live by herself. She needs the help and cooperation of all the bees in her family. Actually, it's not called family anymore because in a nest of honeybees, there are about 60,000 bees in the summertime. So it's called colony. Honeybees live in large colonies. Honeybee in that colony has a job to do at all times. Now there are 3 types of bees in each colony of honeybees. There's one big mother. She's called the queen. She's the largest bee of them all. Here she is. See? And her job is to lay eggs. That is her only job. And in the summertime, she lays about 2,000 eggs every day. 2,000 eggs every day in the summertime. That's a lot of eggs. How many eggs does a chicken lay every day in the summertime, for example? Yes, 1, maybe 2. She lays 6,000 eggs every day. And in the summertime, there are about 60,000 bees in a nest of honeybees. And each honeybee in that colony has a job to do at all times. Now there are 3 types of bees in each colony of honeybees. There's one big mother. She's called the queen. That's right. She's the largest bee of them all. Here she is. And her job is to lay eggs. And she lays about 2,000 eggs every day in the summertime. 2,000 eggs. That's a lot of eggs. How many eggs does a chicken lay, for example, every day in the summer? Yeah, 1, maybe 2. She lays 2,000 eggs every day. She needs to get fed very good food to be able to do that. And the food she gets fed by the other bees is royal jelly. Royal jelly. The very good food, the queen's food, so that she's able to lay all these eggs. Now the males of the colony, which when I talk to the kindergartners, I say the daddies of the colony, are called drones. Can you say that? Drones. Their only job is to mate with the queen, to meet the queen, and now the queen can fly back and start laying eggs. They don't have a stinger. That's their only job, to mate with the queen. They don't have a stinger. They cannot guard the hive. Their mouth is not built in such a way that they can gather food for the winter, so they don't. And they need to get fed by the other bees. They cannot feed themselves. So all summer long, the drones fly around the hive. They ask the other bees, feed me, feed me, feed me. And the other bees will feed the drones all through the summer then. But then in the fall, when the bees are getting ready for the winter, they say, hey drone, by the way, you never guarded our hive. Well, they can't because they don't have a stinger, right? You never ever collected food for the winter and we need to feed you? No deal. We don't have enough food for you. Besides, we don't need you in the winter anyway. So they kick the drones out, they sting them to death, they don't feed them anymore, they starve to death. They don't let them back into the hive, so they freeze to death. And I see piles of dead drones in front of the hive in the fall. And that's when I know the bees are getting ready for the winter. The drone battles have started. And then in the springtime, they make new drones. Now, so we have one queen, we have several hundred drones, and the rest of the colony are the worker bees. And they are called worker bees because they do all the other jobs which need to be done for the well-being and survival of the colony. And each worker bee has a job to do, and they grow from one job into the next. They start out being nurse bees. Those are the worker bees who feed the young. Those are the ones who make the royal jelly. Then they get a few days older and they get the job of the cleaners. Those are the worker bees who clean the hive. They shove out anything which doesn't belong. Little pieces of this, little pieces of that. Every morning I come to my hives, there's a little pile of junk in front of their nest. The cleaners have cleaned the nest. Just like you, when you sweep the kitchen floor for your mom or dad, there's a little pile of junk in front of the broom. That's what I find there. When they get a few days older, then they get the job of the builders. And of course, those are the worker bees who are in charge of building the honeycomb. After that, they get the job of the guard bees. And those are the worker bees who sit in front of the entrance of the hive, just like this, guarding the entrance so no other insect or animal enters the hive to steal what? Yeah, honey, or sometimes bees. Sometimes skunks come to my bees in the middle of the night. Skunks love to eat bees because bees eat honey. They are nice and sweet inside, and skunks love to eat bees like you like to eat candy. What they do is they come in the middle of the night and they scratch at the hive. The guard bees come out and check out what's happening. The skunk scoops them up and eats them. Scratch, scoop, eat, scratch, scoop, all night long. They can eat hundreds and hundreds of bees like this and can do quite a lot of damage to my colonies. And they don't mind getting stung. They love those bee candy so much. Now these are honeybees, worker bees whose job it was this morning to be a guard bee. Because the way I got those into the jar, I went to my hives this morning and I knocked with the empty jar. I knocked against one of the entrances. The guard bees came out and checked out what's happening. They flew into the jar. I closed it off and here they are. So these are honeybees, worker bees, whose job it was this morning to be a guard bee. Now in a few days, their job will change and they will get the last job of their lives. And that is the job of the field bees. And those are the honeybees you see out on the flowers. Because the field bee's job is it to collect the food for the colony. And the food for the colony is pollen and nectar from the flowers. Now here you see such a field bee on a flower. And you see she is covered with pollen dust. Pollen is that yellow powder all blossoms have. And so here she's, which is very good protein food for the bees. And here you see a very important part of the blossoms. And here you see this worker bee, field bee, she's covered with pollen dust. And she does a very important job for the blossoms. And you probably have learned about this already, but I tell you again, as the bees go from blossom to blossom, they get covered with pollen dust, just like this one here. They go to the next blossom, they get covered with more pollen dust, they accidentally spill some pollen dust, they go to the next blossom, they get covered with more, they spill some more. As they go from blossom to blossom, collecting their food, pollen and nectar, they accidentally spill pollen from blossom to blossom. We call that they pollinate the blossoms. And because of that, now the blossoms can make seeds and fruits. Apples and strawberries and beans and peas and cucumbers. Honeybees are very important for our food supply. And they're very important for nature as a whole, because without pollination, the blossoms wouldn't make any seeds, which fall into the ground and make new plants the next spring. So honeybees are very important for us. Now, the way they bring large amounts of pollen back home, they have some folds on their hind legs. We call it the pollen baskets, and they stuff that pollen down those folds. And here you see, this is a pollen collecting field bee. Her pollen baskets are full of pollen. See that? All bees have pollen baskets. You might not always see them as full of pollen. You might not always see these yellow blobs on their hind legs. But whenever you see an insect with these yellow blobs on their hind legs, those insects are part of the family of the bees. And there are hundreds of different bee families, types of bees. And you know a few of them. You know the honeybees now, right? Then you know the bumblebees, right? The big round furry ones. If you look closer, you might see pollen baskets full of pollen on their hind legs. Or you might know the carpenter bees, the big round shiny black ones. Sometimes you see tiny little insects. They look like ants with wings. But no, they have pollen baskets full of pollen. They too belong to the family of the bees. Wasps don't have pollen baskets. Ants don't have pollen baskets. Now the other thing they collect, of course, is nectar. And nectar is a tiny droplet of sugar water deep down in the blossom. And they go down there and they suck it up and they put the nectar in a special place in their belly. They fly back home and then they pass the nectar to the house bees, which is another job the workers have. And here you see a field bee coming home. She's passing the nectar to her house bee, and the house bee now puts the nectar into those honeycomb cells. You see the liquid down in the cells? That is nectar. And then they stand over those nectar-filled cells and fan their wings. They're drying the nectar until the nectar has become thicker and thicker and thicker until the nectar has become honey. And then, oh no, did you sit over there? So the bees make honey from the nectar of the flowers. And once the nectar has become honey, then they put a lid of wax over those honey-filled cells for safekeeping, because that is their winter food and they don't want to get stuck in it until they need it in the winter time. And here you see honeycomb. In the middle, the bees have put a lid of wax over the honey cells. That honey underneath is ready. By the side, the cells are still open. That honey needs a little bit more work. But once the entire comb is covered with a lid of wax, then it's ready to be harvested. And all the kids in the neighborhood, oh, Mrs. D, she's harvesting honey. And they come and watch me from afar. And this is how I do it. I go to my hives. Of course, I bring my smoker with me, my veil, an empty box, and a brush. And I gently pull the honeycomb out one by one. I brush the bees off very gently with my brush, and I put the comb into an empty box, and then I do this with all the honeycombs. And then I bring that box to my honey house to harvest the honey. And this is when Elizabeth always used to help me. Elizabeth is my daughter. She's a grown-up now, but when she was about your age, she used to help me with the honey harvest. And her job was always to get rid of that lid of wax. And here's a picture of Elizabeth. She has this tool in her hand, and she goes underneath that lid of wax, lifting it off. And here she is. She's holding the honeycomb in her hand now. Now you see the honey in the comb. The lid of wax is removed. Now the honey can come out. But the honey is kind of thick. It doesn't run out that easily. So we beekeepers use a centrifuge, which is a big bell. Inside the bell are some baskets, and we put the honeycomb into those baskets. By the side of the bell is a crank, and we crank and crank and crank and crank. Inside the honeycomb twirls around. The honey flies out, runs down the wall of the centrifuge. At the bottom of the centrifuge is a faucet. And what runs out of the faucet? Honey, that's right. And here you see, honey runs out of the faucet. It runs through a sieve into a bucket. Then we pour that bucket of honey through a very fine cloth into another bucket. Then we pour that bucket of honey into bottles. And here is honey from my bees. And now you go and do 5 push-ups. And next time I tell you more about my favorite insects. Bye-bye.